November 2024 will mark the third anniversary of the SQE. So what have we learnt 3 years on? How would we at SQE TV change anything? And what, if anything, is the regulator, the SRA, doing to consult with key stakeholders 3 years on to improve the quality of the exam, the candidate experience, the data they share with the market on candidates and the SQE providers' students' performance? For the answers on all of these questions, stay tuned for the next and our forthcoming videos on SQE TV.
If you wanna be solicitors, why don't you come and visit us at SQE TV?
So the 8th and the 11th of November 2021 were very significant days for future solicitors because they were the first sits of the SQE1 assessments, FLK1 and FLK2. The initial pass rate for all sitters passing both papers was 53%, but since then the first sit pass rate has ranged between 48 and 59%, and those were the two pass rates for the two sits in 2024. So what are Kaplan and the SRA getting right, and where could improvements be made? Stay tuned with me whilst I mark Kaplan and the SRA's homework and tell you in this video what has worked with the introduction of the SQE and where there is room for improvement.
SQE TV.
As we said a moment ago, what we're going to be doing in this video is focusing mainly on the positives, what's gone well for the SQE in its first 3 years. We'll leave it to the later videos we're going to publish in terms of the areas that need a lot of work. So what's gone well? Well, the switch from the LPC to the SQE, the delivery of the assessments, the booking of the assessments, and the publication of the national pass rate data. That's generally gone well. So let's deal with each of these in turn. So firstly, dealing with the switch from the LPC to the SQE. Change management is never easy, but generally speaking, the transitional provisions have gone well, they've been relatively clear, and the majority of candidates have now pivoted successfully towards the SQE, as indeed have most of the firms. The LPC now is very much in its dying days. Yes, there are problems with the SQE, but we at SQE TV firmly say, and have been saying for quite a while, that future LPC candidates really should be thinking about doing the SQE rather than the LPC, because the majority of them, maybe the significant majority of them, will not secure LPC style training contracts, and on that basis the only way they can qualify is to go part down the SQE route, down the transitional provisions, and do SQE2. It doesn't make any sense to do the whole of the LPC then SQE2. You might as well bite the bullet and do the SQE. The only exception I would say is if you've got a training contract in the bag, in which case happy days, do the LPC, but that is going to be a very small minority of the future LPC market. However, we do think that the SRA should have shown a little bit more leadership in looking at the pros and cons of the LPC versus the SQE, because as we were going through the 3-year period, there was clearly a time where a lot of candidates should have chosen the LPC rather than the SQE, and vice versa. And it was left to providers and also the legal press to provide the tools for candidates to make an informed decision. But overall, the transitional provisions were clear. The pivot from LPC to SQE has generally gone relatively smoothly, and on that basis, we'll give the SRA a good, generous 9 out of 10.
SQE TV.
So where else has it gone reasonably well for Kaplan and the SRA in the first few years of the SQE? Well, I would say in the delivery of the assessments. And by delivery, I mean delivery on the day of the actual assessments. So have candidates been able to sit the assessments at the venue that they chose around about the time on the day that they booked? And generally speaking, that's gone successfully. Yes, there have been problems, but we do need to remember that the SQE is an enormously complex series of assessments to write, to book candidates onto, to deliver and to mark. And although delivery on the day hasn't been perfect, with several reported IT failures, particularly in the first few years, the vast majority of candidates have actually sat on the due date at the venue that they booked. And this has partly been due to the changes in 2024 from one fixed day for each of the FLK1 and FLK2 exams to where we are now, where there are 5 papers for FLK1 in week 1 and 5 papers for FLK2 in week 2. So you can sit Monday to Friday in each week, just pick your days. And that means there have been far more seats available at the venues, and generally candidates have got seats in the place and on the dates when they wanted. There have been far fewer issues with the delivery of SQE2. We're very pleased that you can now sit oral skills for SQE2 in a 4th city. That's Birmingham, as well as the cities of London, Manchester and Cardiff, which were there for the first few years. But we'd still like a little bit more geographic coverage for the oral skills for SQE2, which is where you have to go to a hotel in one of those cities we've just mentioned. Perhaps in the northeast we could have a Leeds or Newcastle representation rather than just Manchester in the north, and perhaps in the east of England there could be representation there for candidates to avoid having to pay for hotels or travel long distances on the day of each exam. So we mark Kaplan and the SRA for delivery of SQE1 at 6 out of 10. Be a lot lower than that in the early years of SQE1, but they've redeemed themselves certainly in 2024. And for delivery of SQE2, 8 out of 10.
SQE TV.
Now, I think it's fair to say that when any new complex regime like the SQE is introduced, there's always going to be an element of teething problems. And to a certain extent, we must give the SRA and Kaplan a little bit of slack, because some of the decisions they made could have been made by anyone, although one or two own goals were made on the way where some decisions perhaps could have been avoided. And that's particularly the case in relation to the whole booking process. Things in the early years didn't go fantastically well, and particularly in 2023 reached a crescendo of noise when candidates were finding it impossible to get booked onto an SQE exam at the venue of their choice, despite the fact that many SQE providers gave them a day off their SQE studies in order to book their assessments, because the providers knew there was going to be this problem. It was a bit like trying to book Taylor Swift tickets, or in my case Oasis tickets, being left hanging on a platform for hours and hours for the whole day more or less, and still ending up disappointed. Some candidates reported having to book in cities outside the city that they preferred to sit because they just needed to sit it on a particular date. Others even booked in different countries just to ensure they could sit in that assessment window. Fortunately, the SRA and Kaplan heard the noise and stepped in, found more dates, and allowed many of those candidates to switch their booking to a date and a venue of their choice, much closer to what they were looking to do originally. But hey, that was something that could have been avoided. But we're now following the introduction of a new booking process in 2024 in a much better place. Why? Well, before the booking window actually opens, the SRA and Kaplan introduced a procedure by which candidates are invited to reserve a place at a particular venue on a particular date for the assessment of their choice. And the way that that works is that allows Kaplan then to reserve seats at those venues, and generally speaking are able to honour the seat reservation requests to those candidates. So a much better process. There's no rush for the doors as soon as the booking window opens. It's much more civilised. I think the mental health of candidates is going to be extremely improved compared to what it was in 2023. So well done the SRA and Kaplan for getting that together on that. It's just a shame that we had the issues in 2023. It's not perfect in relation to the cancellation process, which I'll deal with in a later video, but overall for the booking process, I would say up to 2023, because of the problems I've just explained, no better than 3 out of 10 for Kaplan and the SRA, but certainly from 2023 it's 8 out of 10, and if they can sort out the issues with the cancellation policy, which we'll deal with in later videos, then it could end up being a 9 or a 10.
SQE TV.
And the final thing we want to discuss with you in this video is the national pass rate data, which has been very good, I would say, in terms of what the SRA has published. They've tended to publish it very shortly after they've published the actual results for students. I'd like to see the pass rate data actually come out on the day the results are released, but other than that, the quality of the data within the reports that the SRA have published, a link for it you'll find in the chat, has been excellent. They've tended to lead with the pass rate data for first-time sitters and all sitters to enable you to compare between different sits. What the SRA have been less good about, I'm afraid, though, is comparing the pass rates of resitters. In fact, they don't give a pass rate for resitters at all. But we at SQE TV have managed to do our calculations, and broadly, the resit pass rate is around about 25%. I'm afraid that this is something that maybe the SRA have ducked in terms of being something that they want to include in their reports, but I'd encourage them in the spirit of transparency to confirm what those rates are going forward. They've also been very transparent, and it's to their credit because it is quite problematic. The SRA have been very transparent in the pass rates of various diversity strands. The figures do not make pleasant reading. But the one thing that we need the SRA to improve on significantly when it comes to collecting data is the data in relation to the pass rates for individual SQE providers and the courses that those providers run. What we will be doing in later videos is looking at the more troubling areas in relation to the SQE. But before we leave the subject of the national statistics, we would say it's an 8 out of 10 for the national pass rates.
SQE TV.
So if you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We love it when you do. And of course, if you do, click that notification bell that you can see up there right now. You'll get to see our videos as soon as they drop. And finally, as we always do, when we close an SQE TV video, we say, it's now time for the jingle.
If you wanna be solicitors, why don't you